Welcome to our channel. Here we publish free of charge the most useful and interesting books every week. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to not miss the next videos. Good listening. Introduction: what you will learn from listening to this audiobook. The United States Securities Commission recognizes as accredited investor any person whose annual income is $200,000 or more, or family annual income and $300,000 or more, or assets have a net value of $1 million or more. The Commission has established its criteria whose purpose is to protect the average investor from some of the worst and most risky investments. But these criteria also prevent the average investor to have access to the best investments that can be. And this is one of the reasons why Parrish edit to average investor, don't stay in the average, start from nothing. My story starts when I came back from Vietnam in 1973. Just a year later, I will be reformed in the Marine Corps of the United States, and it meant that I would soon find myself without a job, without money, and without assets. You are certainly, many of you, found in such a situation and had to start from nothing. All I had in 1973 is the dream that one day I will be rich, and that I will be able to make the investments that rich people make. These investments that few people hear about, that don't mention in the financial pages of the newspapers, and that investment brokers don't trade across the country. This book starts when I had nothing but a dream and Parrish support to become an investor. So even if you have very little or a lot of money to invest today, and even if you know very little or thoroughly the world of investment, this book should interest you. It deals in simple terms of a very complex subject. It is addressed to anyone who wants to become a better investor, regardless of his income. This is your first book about investment, and if you are worried that it's too complicated, please don't worry. The only thing I ask you is to want to acquire new knowledge and taste this audiobook from beginning to end, keeping an open mind. If some parts of this book seem incomprehensible, listen to them anyway and go all the way. If you listen to this audiobook until its conclusion, even if you do not understand everything, you will know more about the investment than many people currently investing in the de facto market. By listening to this book until the last minute, you will know more about the investment that many investment advisors who are paid to offer their advice. This book first deals with the basics of investment and then deals with these most complex aspects, but without ever dwelling too much on the details or becoming hermetic. In many respects, this book starts in simplicity and remains so. Although it deals with some very complex investment strategies, it is the story of a rich man who guides a young man with illustrations and diagrams helping to understand the world of investment, which can often seem obscure. The monetary rule of 90-10. Parrish had a lot of esteem for the rule of 80-20, discovered by the Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto, is also known as the law of least effort. However, when it was money, Parrish leaned rather for the rule of 90-10, which says that 10% of people still earn 90% of the money. For me, I am concerned because more and more families rely on their investments to ensure their future livelihood. The problem is the following. While more and more people invest, very little are sophisticated investors. If the market collapses, what would happen to all its new investors? The federal government of United States insure our savings, catastrophic losses, but they do not insure our investments. That is why when I asked Father Rich, what advice would you give to the average investor? He replied, does not stay in the average. How not to stay in the average? I was only 12 years old when I became aware of the world of investment. Until this age, the concept of investment was not really part of my universe. I come here, you are there, it is much more baseball and football. Of course, I had heard the people around me pronounce this word, but I did not really pay attention until that day. I understood the extent of power if they contained. I have the memory of a walk along a beach with the man I call Parrish and his son Mike, who was also my best friend. Rich father show us both the land he had just bought. Even if I was only 12 years old, I realized that rich father had just acquired one of the most prestigious land properties in the city. Despite my young age, I knew that a land located on the ocean front, overlooking a sandy beach, was worth much more than a land without direct access to the beach. My first thought was how Mike's father could afford a land of such great value. I was standing there, stroking my bare feet, watching a man who was the same age as my biological father and who had just made one of the biggest financial investments of his life. The fact that he could offer such land filled me with admiration. Knew that my father made a lot more money as a senior civil servant, but I also knew that he could never afford such land on the ocean front. So how could Mike's father? I did not know that my career as a professional investor had just begun at the very moment that I realized the extent of the power that the word contains investment. Some 40 years after this walk on the beach with Parrish and his son Mike, there are people who ask me the same questions that I started asking that day as part of the courses I give on investment. Students ask me questions similar to those I asked Father Rich. For example, how can I invest if I have no money? I have $10, $1,000 to invest. What options are available to me? Recommend you to invest in real estate, mutual funds, or shares. Can I acquire real estate or shares without having money? Do not have to have money to make money. Is it not risky? How do you manage to get so much return by taking so few risks? Can I a locker room with you? People begin to understand the full extent of the power contained in the word investment. Many people who wish to discover how to acquire this power for themselves, after listening to this audiobook, you will have found an answer to many of these questions. If some of your questions do not find an answer, I hope you will look more to find the answers that suit you. More than 40 years ago, the most important thing that made this rich father was vigils in my mind. This thirst to know the world of investment that piqued my curiosity when I realized that the father of my best friend, a man whose income was less than that of my biological father, at least if one compares their paycheck, could afford to make investments that were only within the reach of wealthy people. I realized that rich father had a power that my biological father did not have, and I wanted to have that power too. Many people are afraid of that power and stay away from it, and many are victims instead of fleeing that power or denigrating it by using formulas such that the rich exploits the poor, where it is risky to invest, or it does not interest me to become rich. I, on the contrary, felt an immense curiosity towards this man. It is this curiosity and my desire to acquire this power also, known as knowledge and skill, and can enjoy such great wealth while I was standing on the beach at the age of 12, contemplating the new acquisition of Parrish. My mind has opened up to a world of possibilities that did not exist in my own home. I understood that it was not money that made a rich investor of rich father. I also understood that Parrish's thought pattern was opposite, or almost opposite to that of my biological father, and even contradicted it often. I understood, moreover, that I had to grasp the thought pattern of rich father if I wanted to have the same financial power as him. I knew that in thinking like him, I would be rich forever. I also knew that in not thinking like him, I would never really be rich, no matter how much money I have. Parrish had just bought one of the most prestigious land of our city, and he had no money. I understood that wealth is a way of thinking, and not the end. Balance of a bank account. It is this pattern of thinking of rich investors that I want you to discover in this book, The Answer of Rich Father. Don't forget to subscribe to the chain so you don't miss new books standing on the beach 40 years ago. I finally found the courage to ask Parrish the following question. How can you afford to buy these 10 acres of overpriced land at the edge of the ocean when my father can't Parrish? Then gave me an answer that I never forgot. He touched my shoulder with his hand, and we started to walk along the shore. With warmth he started to explain to me the essence of his thinking about money and investment. The first words of his answer. It was me neither. I cannot afford to buy this land, but my business it can. That day we walked on the beach for an hour, my friend Mike and I on each side of rich father, but investment lesson had just started. Recently, I was giving a course of 3 days on investment to sign in Australia. During the first day and a half, I discussed the tenets and weavers of creating a frustrated business, A participant finally raised his hand and said, "I came here to learn to invest. Why spend so much time talking about the business world?" Here is what I answered him. There are two reasons to this. First is that in a business we invest. If you buy shares, you invest in a business. If you buy a property, for example, a residential building, this building is also a business. If you buy bonds, you invest again in a business. To be a good investor, you must first of all excel in the business world. Secondly, the best way to invest is to do it through your business. The worst way to invest is to do it as an individual. The average investor with a very limited knowledge of the business world, and they often invest as an individual. That is why I dwell on this topic when I give a course on investment, and that is also why I will dwell in this book on how to start a business and analyze it. I will also dwell on how to invest through a business, because that is how Rich Father taught me to invest, as he told me 40 years ago. Neither, I can't afford to buy this land, but my business it can. In other words, the Rich Father's modus operandi was this: my business invests for me. The majority of people are not rich because they invest as an individual and not as a business owner in this book. You'll see why the majority of the 10% of people who own 90% of the shares are business owners and invest through their business. And you'll see how you can do the same in this audiobook. I call these people investors 90-10. A little later, the participant who asked me understood why I spent so much time talking about the business world. Little by little, this participant and the whole group realized that the richest investors in the world do not finance their investments, but that investors who respect the rule of 90% 10 create their own investment. If there are billionaires who are not yet 30 years old, it is not because they financed their investments. They created investments, that I mean companies that millions of people want to buy. I hear almost every day people say, "I have an idea about a new product that could make millions." Unfortunately, the majority of its innovative ideas will never be exploited to their fair value. The second part of this book deals with how 10% of the population transforms their ideas into multi-millionaire, if not multi-billionaire companies that others invest in, which is why Parrish spent so much time teaching me how to establish the foundations of a company and how to analyze the companies in which to invest. So if you have an idea that in your opinion could make you a rich person and maybe even help you grow the ranks of the Investors Club 90-10, the second part of this book is devoted to you. Buy, hold, and pray over the years of the rich has emphasized that investment it doesn't mean the same to everyone. Today I often hear people say things like, "I just bought 500 shares of company X at $5 a unit. The recourse to go up to $15 and I sold. I made a gain of $5,000 in less than a week. My husband and I buy old houses, renovate and resell them at good profits. I negotiate commodity futures. I have more than $1 million in my retirement account. These are safe investments, a diversified portfolio invested in anticipation of the future." As Parrish said, does not mean the same for everyone. The previous statements relate to different formulas, the investment methods, but Parrish did not invest according to the previous statements. He said, the majority of people are not investors. The majority of people are speculators or gamblers. The majority of people have a mentality focused on this axiom: buy, hold, and pray for the price to rise. The majority of investors nourish hope that the market will stay strong while being haunted by the prospect of a stock market crash. The real investor always makes money, whether the market is up or down. They make money that they have bet just where it is. Deceived, he knows ups and downs. The average investor does not know how to do it, and that's why he is among the 90% who only earns 10% of the money. Beyond buying to keep and pray for Parrish invest, was much more cash is kept and pray in this book. We will look at topics such as 1. Lady level of control of the investor, who can reduce the risks and increase the profits. Father Rich said, "A locker room is not risky. It is losing control. That is risky. 2. The 5 phases of the plan that Parrish developed to guide me to bring the dedge. I was investing a lot of money. Phase 1 of his plan was to mentally prepare me to become a wealthy investor. Although very simple, this phase is very important for anyone who wants to invest with confidence. 3. The different tax laws that govern different investors. In my second book entitled The Cash Flow Dial, I describe the 4 types of investors that we find in the business world. It is the 2 correspond to the employee, T, self-employed, to small business owners, the P to owners of large businesses, and the I to the investor. Father Rich encouraged me to invest from the framework in peace, because the tax laws are more advantageous for business owners. He always said the tax laws are not fair. They were written for the rich by the rich. If you want to become rich, you have to use the laws that the rich use. One of the reasons why 10% of people own the majority of wealth and only 10% of people know what law to take advantage of. In 1943, the federal government of the United States made almost inaccessible all tax loopholes to all employees. Then, in 1986, it took away from the haunted individuals, doctors, accountants, engineers, and architects all the tax loopholes that play, and those who move in the framework in peace, and that it enjoyed themselves. In other words, before another reason why 10% of investors make 90% of the money, and only 10% of all investors know how to invest from the 4 dials, so as to take full advantage of the tax advantages. Often, the average investor invested only from 1 dial. 4. Why and how a real investor makes money, whether the market is up or there is a stock market crash. 5. The difference between fundamental and technical investments. 6. 5 types of very high-level investors in the Rich Father Cash Flow Dial. I describe the 5 categories of investors. This audiobook ranks the 2 main categories of professional and technical investors. Capitalist in the 5 types of investors. Following the accredited investor of qualified investors, the informed investor, the initiated investor, and the experienced investor. By completing this audiobook, you will be what distinguishes each type of investor in terms of skills and knowledge. 7. The difference between not having enough money and having too many. People say, when I will make a lot of money, I will no longer have money problems, and do not realize that the individual who has too much money has as many problems as the one who does not have enough. In this book, you will learn to distinguish between these 2 types of problems. In the first case, we do not, not enough money. In the second one, has too many. People understand how far it is easy to own too much money. If so many people are penniless after making a lot of money, it is because they have not been able to solve this problem. In this book, you will learn how to tackle the problem of lack of money, how to make a lot of money, and then how to manage the problems that leads to abundance. In other words, in this audiobook, you will learn not only how to make a lot of money, but more importantly, how to keep it. As Parrish said, what good to make a lot of money if you end up losing? One of my friends broker securities told me one day, the average investor doesn't get rich by playing the stock market. I saw so many investors make a lot of money one year and lose everything the next year. 8. How to secure an income well above $200,000. The minimum income to start investing in the spheres where rich people invest. Rich Father told me, money is only a viewpoint. How can you be rich if you think that $200,000 represents a fortune? If you want to become a rich investor, you have to consider that the sum of $200,000 of assets, minimum to be admitted as investorite, is just a drop in the bucket. That's why phase 1 of this book is so important. In phase 1 of this audiobook, that allows you to mentally prepare yourself to become a wealthy investor. There is a short questionnaire for you at the end of each chapter. The questions are simple, but they are designed to make you think and discuss your answers with people who are dear to you. It summarizes the introspective examination that Parrish made me do, and that helped me find the answers I was looking for. In other words, many of the answers I was looking for about the world of investment were already in me. That is what makes the investor different. 90-10, one of the most important aspects of this book, is about what distinguishes the average investor from the investor 90-10. Rich Father often said, if you want to become rich, observe well what people do and do exactly the opposite. In this audiobook, you will learn that the main differences between the 10% investors who earn 90% of the money and the 90% investors who earn only 10% of the money are not about their investments, but about their way of thinking. For example, most investors do not take risks. The rich investor takes risks. Most of the investors diversifying your portfolio. The rich investors focus on a particular sector. The average investor tries to minimize his debt. The wealthy investor increases his debt in his favor. The average investor tries to reduce his spending. The wealthy investor knows how to increase his spending in order to get even richer. The average investor in employment. The wealthy investor creating jobs. The average investor works hard. The wealthy investor always works less and less to win ever more medals. One of the most important aspects of this book is, therefore, to notice when your thoughts of lives of 180 degrees compared to the guidelines of the parish teaching. He said one of the reasons why so few people become rich, and because they become prisoners of a pattern of thinking. He thinks there is only one way of thinking or doing things, while the average investor says he is careful and does not take the risk. The rich investors are looking to improve his skills so they can take more risks. Perry Rosary, this way of thinking, the world thinks, and on both sides of the coin. He also said the rich investor must have a more flexible thinking than the average investor. For example, even if the average investor and the rich investors must both worry about security, the rich investor must also find the way to take more risks while the average investor is thinking about reducing his. The wealthy investor is busy increasing his own. While the average investor lives in fear of a stock market crash, the wealthy investor lives in the hope that the market will collapse. Although this may seem contradictory in the eyes of the average investor, it is this contradiction that makes the wealthy investor wealthy. Throughout your listening has remained aware of its contradictions between the way of thinking of the average investor and that of the wealthy investor. As Parrish said, the wealthy investor knows full well that any metal on two sides. The average investor sees only a trial on the side of the metal that the average investor does not see. The second part of this book deals with this other side of the metal. Do you want to be more than an average investor? This audiobook is much more than a book about investing, the good pipes and the magic formulas. One of the main purposes of this book is to offer you the opportunity to see differently the world of investment. It begins with my return from Vietnam in 1973 and with my preparation to become a rich investor. In 1973, Parrish began to teach me how to acquire a financial power identical to his own. The first time at the age of 12, 40 years ago, standing on a sandy beach in front of the last acquisition of wealthy father, I understood that when it came to investments, the difference that existed between Parrish and my biological father went far beyond the amount of money that each of them could actually invest. This difference is, first of all, in the deep desire to be much more than an average investor. If you feel such a desire, then continue listening to a being mentally ready to become an investor. Chapter No Investment Lesson Number 1. In which sector should never style? I returned from Vietnam in 1977. I had the privilege of being posted to a base in Hawaii near my home, rather than to a base on the east coast of the United States. After settling in the Navy Cross Station, I phoned my friend Mike, and we agreed to a dinner with his father. This man I called Rich Father, as Mike was eager to introduce me to his newborn and to show me his new home. We decided to meet at his home the following Saturday, when Mike's limousine came to pick me up in front of the grayish building that served as accommodation for the unmarried officers. I began to realize how much things had changed since we graduated from high school in 1965. "I welcome you home," said Mike, as we walked into the vestibule of his beautiful Mike marble floor house. The blossoming face with broad smile held his 7-month-old son in his arms. When he told me, "I'm glad you came back in one piece," and I replied, looking over Mike's shoulder, the bluish shimmer of the Pacific Ocean that was licking the white sand in front of his house. This last one was spectacular. It was a tropical mansion on one floor, endowed with both the grace and charm of old and new Hawaiian homes. There were 2 magnificent Persian carpets of immense potted green plants, and a large pool that came in hunting. And 3 sides of the house, the 4th side overlooking the ocean. The house was vast and ventilated, a true model of island life, to which added the finest details. It responded in every way to what I imagined to be a life of luxury. "Hawaii, I present you my son, James," said Mike, surprised. I had to remain mouth aglow in ecstasy before the dazzling beauty of this residence. "What beautiful child," I added, as everyone else does when watching, again, born while I was making faces at a baby who was looking at me with amazed eyes, and my mind was still in shock at the number of changes that occurred in 8 years. I was living on a military base in an old shack, sharing a room with 3 other disorderly young pilots and beer lovers, while Mike lived in a domain worth several $1,000,000 with his wonderful wife and their newborns. Between pursued Mike, Dad and Connie await us on the terrace. The food was exceptional and served by their full-time maid. I was to appreciate the meal, the landscape, and the company of my. But when I thought about my 3 roommates, who were probably eating at the officers' mess at the same time, considering that it was Saturday, the menu was probably made of a sandwich and a bowl of soup. After we exchanged jokes and took stock of the good old days, the one I call Rich Country said, "As you can see, Mike did a great job investing the profits of the company. We made more money in the last 2 years than I made in the previous 20 years. This confirms the statement that it is the first million that is the hardest to collect. So business has been good, and I ask and encourage them to reveal to me how their wealth has increased so drastically." "Business is excellent," said Parrish. "It's new 747 at the same time tourists from all over the world, Hawaii, that our business can do otherwise than to thrive. But our real success rests on our investments rather than on the business itself. And Mike is responsible for the investments. Congratulations and Thursday to Mike. Well played." "Thank you," said Mike, "but I can't take all the credit. It is Dad's investment formula that gives wonders during all these years. I only did what he taught us about business and investment. It certainly pays off." I said, "I can't believe you live in the most upscale area of the city. I'll remember when we were poor kids running between houses with our surfboards to get to Mahikari Beach, of course. And I remember being chased by all those old rich and mean men. Now I am myself a rich and mean old man chasing his kids, who would never have imagined that you and I would live Nike his hits." Suddenly, when he realized this, that he was saying, he realized that while they live here, I lived on the other side of the island, on a military base composed of Turns Barak. "I am to them," and he said, "I didn't want to excuse you." I said, smiling, "I am happy for you. I am happy to see you so rich and prosperous. You deserve it, because you took the time to learn to run the company. I could leave my house in a few years as soon as my engagement with the Marines ended." Parrish, feeling the tension between me and Mike, intervened and said, "He did a better job. Then I am very proud from him. I am proud of my son and his wife. They make a great team, and they have won everything they have. Now that you are back from the front, it is your turn, Roberts. Can I invest with you? I would love to invest with you, and I say with eagerness. I saved nearly $3,000 while I was in Vietnam, and I would like to invest them before spending them. Can I invest with you?" "Well, I will give you the name of a good broker," answered Parrish. "I'm sure they provide you with some good advice, and maybe even 1 or 2 good tips. No, I say I want to invest in the same areas that you've been going since the time that I know you both. I know that you always have investment projects in progress, or in preparation. I don't want to go to a broker. I want to do business with you. The silence enveloped the room while I waited for Parrish and Mick to give me an answer. The silence quickly turned to tension. "No," said Mike. "Dad and I will invest in new projects that are very exciting. But I believe it is better that you first call one of our brokers, and you start investing with him." There was another silence, broken only by the noise of plates and of the greens while Maid was serving the table. Connie, Mike's wife, apologized and took the baby to another room. "I don't understand," and I say, turning to Father Rich more than to Mike. "I've been chasing all these years. I worked with you two to set up this business. I worked for almost nothing. Went to college, as you advised me, and I fought for my country, because you told me that a young man must do it. Now that I'm old enough and finally have a few dollars to invest, you seem reluctant when I say, I want to invest in the same sectors as you. I understand why this revival buffeted. It's you two snubbed me. Or standing aside, don't you want me to become as rich as you two? It's not a snub, retorted Mike, and we hold each other up. Burion never, nor would wish you to ever become rich. It's that things are different now. It's by shrugging your head in a slow and silent movement we would love you to invest in the same sectors as finally told us Parrish. But it would be against the law. Contrary to the law. I was rehearsing, did not believe my ears. Do you do something illegal? No, said Father, Rich with a little laugh. We would never do anything illegal. It is too easy to become legally rich, to risk going to jail or doing something illegal. And it is because we always want to stay on the right side of the law that we say it would be illegal for you to invest with us, added Mrs. Hawk. It is not illegal for Mike and me to invest in those sectors where we invest, but it would be illegal if you get it. Tried to summarize, Parrish, why I asked, because you said, Mike, gently and kindly, the sectors in which we invest are reserved for rich people. The words of Mike reached the full whip as he was my best friend. I knew that it was for him, words difficult to pronounce, that he did it with the most sweetness possible. These kids tore the heart. I was beginning to measure the depth of the financial chasm that separated him while his father and my father had both started from nothing. Mike and his father had become very rich. I could feel that this huge house and its adorable white sand beaches were still clearly beyond my reach, and that the distance that lies apart was not measured only kilometers. My 200 on my chair and crossing arms plunged into my thoughts. I stayed there. Hoshet, quietly, with my head, as I summarized this moment we had just spent together. Mike and I were both 25 years old, but in many ways, Mike had 25 years advanced over me, financially speaking. My own father had just been more or less fired from his position in government, and he was starting over again at the age of 52. On my side, I had not yet undertaken anything. Will it kindly ask Parrish? Yeah, it will go, I answered, doing my best to hide the pain that this API you guys brings on my fate and on that of my family. I am thinking, and I answer, take an introspective. Look, it's all, I said, successful, so offer in a brave smile. The room was silent while we listened to the sound of the waves, and a cool breeze entered this magnificent home. Rich Mike, Father and I sat, while I assimilate is the message and accept the reality, so I cannot invest with you because I am not rich. And I finally said, as I came out of the torpor, I fell. And if I invest, it is in the same areas that you would go against the law, as Rich and Mike Mosier had in some cases, added Mike, and who enacted this law? Did I ask the federal government? Answered. Dude, the SEC, added Parrish. The SEC, I ask, what is the SEC? Is the U.S. Securities Commission, answered Parrish. It was created in the 1930s under the leadership of Joseph Kennedy, the father of our late president, John Kennedy. And why it was created, it asked the rich Harry. It was created to protect the public from speculators, business people, brokers, and unscrupulous investors. Why would you ask him? I seem like a good thing. Yes, is a very good thing, countered Parrish by still chuckling. A little before the stock market crash of 1929, many dangerous and risky shady investments, and is offered to the public. Lies and false information circulated in abundance. The SEC was therefore formed to serve as In and if I invest, it is in the same areas that you would go against the law. Is Rich and Mike Mosier head in some cases, added Mike, and who enacted this law? Did I ask the federal government? Answered Dude. The SEC, added Parrish. The SEC, I ask, what is the SEC? Is the U.S. Securities Commission, answered Parrish. It was created in the 1930s under the leadership of Joseph Kennedy, the father of our late President John Kennedy. And why it was created, it asked the Rich Harry. It was created to protect the public from speculators, business people, brokers, and unscrupulous investors. Why would you ask him? I seem like a good thing. Yes, is a very good thing, countered Parrish, by still chuckling a little. Before the stock market crash of 1929, many dangerous and risky shady investments and is offered to the public. Lies and false information circulated in abundance. The SEC was therefore formed to serve as reasons for which the rich get richer, and I asked in a very small voice. You understood everything. I laugh because I see the irony of the situation. People invest because they want to become rich, but because they are not rich, they do not have the right to make those investments that would allow them to become rich. Only rich people can invest in the same way as rich people, and that is why the rich get richer. I find it very ironic, and why it is so. This is so to protect the poor and the middle class against the rich. Did not necessarily answer, Mike. I believe it is actually to protect the poor and the middle class. Even why? Tell you that I asked him, because there are a lot more bad deals than good deals. If a person has not notified all the transactions, good or bad, looks the same to him. It takes a lot of knowledge and experience to discern the good and bad deals. Among the most complex investments, the sophisticated investor is able to determine whether an investment is good or dangerous, and the majority of people simply do not have his knowledge and this experience. A guy is rich, Mike. Why would not go and get documents related to the transaction we are currently studying? Mike left the table to go to his office and came back with a 3-ring binder about 5 centimeters thick, filled with illustrative sheets of tables and maps. Here is an investment we could make, said Mike, sitting down. This is an unregistered title. It is also sometimes called private placement. I felt torpor invade my mind as Mike turned pages and showed me graphs of tables of cards and sheets covered with texts describing the risks and benefits of this somewhat sleepy investment. I listened. Mike too explained to me the contents of the documents he was leafing through, the reasons why they believed this investment represented a good opportunity. Of the rich, see that it's getting a bit lost in this avalanche of unfamiliar information that interrupted Mike and said this is what I wanted Robert Du Bois Berisha to say when he pointed to a short paragraph on the cover of a brochure entitled Exemption from the Securities Act of 1933. This is what I want you to understand. He told me. I leaned over to read the fine print he was referring to. It was written, this investment is reserved for accredited investors. An accredited investor, and usually someone who owns assets with a net worth of $1 million or more, or an annual income of $200,000 or more in most of the last few years, or a family annual income of $300,000, and who can reasonably expect to have a similar income during the current year. Letting me go back on my chair, I said, and that's why I can't make the same investments as you. This investment is only for the rich, or for people who have high income, said Mike. These guidelines are not only strict, but the minimum amount you can invest here is $35,000, is the price of each unit of this investment, $35,000. It represents a lot of money and a great risk. You want to say that it is the minimum amount that an individual can invest in this transaction. Is Rich to nod. What salaries the government pays as a pilot? I was earning about $12,000 a year with my flight and combat bonuses in Vietnam. But I don't know what my salary will be now that I'm based in Hawaii. I would probably have a cost of living adjustment, but it will certainly not be very high, and it will not cover all my living expenses in Hawaii. So, it is quite a feat if you manage to save $3,000, said Parrish, doing his best to boost the morale. You save nearly 25% of his gross income. I nodded while realizing how far away I was from becoming what is called an accredited investor. I realized that even if I became general in the navies, I would probably not earn enough money to be recognized as an accredited investor. So what should I do is finally asked. Why can't I give you my $3,000 so you fill them, sign to your own money, and then share the profits? We could do it, said Parrish, but it's not a practice that I recommend to you anyway. Why not to me? You already have a pretty solid financial training. You can become well more than an accredited investor. If you want, you can become an informed investor. You will then become richer than in his wildest dreams. Accredited investors, informed investors? Where is the difference? I asked, feeling reborn in less. Hope this is a good question, said Mike with a smile, feeling that his friend saw light at the end of the tunnel. An accredited investor is by definition an individual who qualifies because he has money. That is why it is often called qualified investors, explained to me Parrish. But money alone does not allow to be a big-way informed investor. Yes, the difference is definitely the biggest headlines in yesterday's paper about this Hollywood star who lost millions in a fraudulent investment. Asked me. Parrish, I nodded my head saying yes. Not only did he lose millions, but he had to pay a certain amount to the tax for an untaxed income he lost in this transaction. And well, this is an example of accredited or qualified investors. Sued Parrish, it is not the money that makes you a savvy investor. It is for this reason that we see so many individuals whose incomes are high. For example, doctors, lawyers of rock stars, and professional athletes lose money in precarious investments. They have the money, but their knowledge is insufficient. They have money, but do not know how to invest it safely and get big profits from it. In their eyes, all transactions are similar. They are therefore unable to distinguish between a good investment and a bad. It should be limited to sanitized investments or hire a financial expert whom they trust to invest in their place. So what is your definition of the informed investor? I asked a knowledgeable investor. No, the third answered me Parrish the third. Which are these third? Parrish returned the document we just reviewed and write the following on the back of one of pages. 1. Education. 2. Enriences. 3. Surplus cash. It is the third, he says, by looking up, acquire these 3 elements, and you will be a warned investor. Eyes fixed on the list. I risked the movie star so had a surplus cash, but the first 2 elements were missing, and there are many people who have the necessary knowledge, but who do not have the experience. And without this experience, he cannot get a surplus cash. When explained to them, something these people often I know, but he does not apply what they know. Added Mike, our banker says I know about what Dad and I do, but for some reason, he doesn't apply what they say they know. And that's why your banker doesn't have excess cash. And I close Parrish, and Mick nodded again. The room became silent at the end of the conversation. We were all 3 immersed in our own personal thoughts, and Rich waved at the maid to fill our cups of coffee, and Mike closed the class rings. Seated on the terrace of Mike's magnificent house, with arms crossed, I was staring at the waters of a deep blue of the Pacific Ocean. I was thinking about the direction I will take in my life. I had finished college as my parents had. Wished my military service was coming to an end, and I will then be free to choose the path that would suit me best. What you asked me, rich father, while having a sip of fresh coffee. I think about what I want to do. My bank, I am big, I answered, and want to make my request. And Mike, I thought I could become a sophisticated investor. And I replied slowly, whatever the definition, it would be a wise choice, said rich father. You speak on the right foot because you have received a good financial education. Now you need to acquire experience, and how sore, that I have enough D2. When you will have excess cash, responded Parrish. Smiling at what we all 3 burst out laughing. Raise our cups by toasting to those who have excess cash. Rich father then added, and to those who want to become savvy investors, to savvy investors and those who have excess cash. She concludes, in my heart never the echo that his words in my head. The driver of Mike's limousine was summoned, and I went back to the gloomy officer's quarter to think about what I will do with the rest of my life. I was adult, and I had met my parents' expectations, such as going to university and serving my country in wartime. I now had to decide my direction alone. I could continue to gain knowledge from Parrish while I accumulate the experience I needed. This time Parrish would guide me as an adult. 20 years later, in 1993, the fortune of Parrish was divided among his grandchildren and their future descendants. For the next few hundred years, his heirs would not have to worry about money. Mike received the basic assets of the company and did a magnificent job prospering the financial empire of Parrish, a financial empire that the latter had erected from nothing. I had seen it born and then grew throughout my life. It took me 20 years to realize what I thought I could do in 10 years. There is some truth in this popular adage. It is the first million that is the hardest to raise. When I thought about this first $1 million was not so difficult. It is to preserve it and make it fruitful that I found the hardest. Nevertheless, years free, financially speaking, and with enough money to enjoy life, however, it is not the retirement that I found exciting. Indeed, it is to finally be able to invest as a savvy investor that they all told me, Miss Moore. Being able to invest alongside Mike and Parrish was a goal worth achieving. This distant day of 1973, when Mike and Parrish told me that I was not rich enough to invest with them, was a turning point in my life, and that is the day that I took the resolution to become a sophisticated investor. Here's a list of some of the investments made by the so-called accredited investors and sophisticated investors: private equity, real estate unions, and limited partnerships. After Pope's first public offering, these investments are offered to all investors, but they are not easily accessible. Financing out of the norm group of companies near startup, hedge funds for the average investor. These investments are too risky, not because the investment itself presents too much risk, but because too often the average investor does not have the knowledge of experience and a sufficient capital surplus to know how to cope with the requirements of investments. I now tend to agree, and from the SEC side, saying that it is better to protect novice investors by not giving them access to this kind of investment, because I made some mistakes and made some missteps along the way, and I know that others can do the same. As a savvy investor today, I go into such companies knowing what one does. The risk is very low, whereas the eventual return can be considerable. It is such companies that the rich invest their money. Although I have suffered some losses, the return of the capital well invested has been spectacular. By far, the sum of my losses, a return of 35%, is normal, but a return of 1,000% and plus is sometimes possible. I choose to make this type of investment because I find them more exciting and more stimulating. It is not just a question of months without action of these or sold without action of this. It has nothing to do with the activities of a sophisticated investor. Allocating capital to this type of investment. It is getting closer to the engine of de facto capitalism. Some of the investments offered its displacement of venture capital, much too risky for the average investor. In reality, the investments are not risky. It is the lack of knowledge of experience and capital, which but the lure. Average investor in a precarious position, voice of this book, is not necessarily about investments. This book is more specifically about the investor is on the path to becoming a savvy investor. It is about how you will find the voice that will allow you to acquire the third education, experience, and cash surpluses. Father Rich, Father Poor tells my pedagogical journey as a child, the cash flow dial, the sequel of Parrish Father Poor portions. Pedagogical journey as young adults between the years 1973 and 1994. This book, entitled Guide to Invest, focuses on the lessons learned in previous years and transforms its lessons into C3 ones that will allow you to become a savvy investor. In 1973, I had barely $3,000 at a locker room. My knowledge was limited, as well as my life experience, and in 1994, I had become a sophisticated investor. Several years ago, Parrish told me, just as there are houses for the rich, the poor, and the middle class, there are investments for each of them. If you want to invest like the rich, you have to be more than rich. You have to become a sophisticated investor, and not just a rich person who invests. The 5 phases of the path of the sophisticated investor. Father Rich to divide my development program into 5 distinct phases that I have organized into phase lessons. In Chapter 1, are you mentally ready to become an investor? 2, what kind of stissers do you want to become? 3, how to build a solid business. 4, portraits of the savvy investor. 5, doing the same. This book was written to serve as a guide. It will not give you a specific answer. It proposes to help you understand the questions that you should ask, and if this book will have achieved its objective. Parrish said, "You cannot teach someone to become a savvy investor, but an individual can learn to become a savvy investor. It is like learning to ride a bicycle. I cannot teach it, but you can learn to make it learn to ride, and cycling carries risks. It is the result of trial and error and advice from a good guide. It is the same in the world of investment. If you do not want to take risks, it is like saying that you do not want to take, and if you do not want to take, then I can teach nothing. If you are looking for good tips or a miracle recipe to become rich quickly, or a magic formula that only the rich know, this book is not for you. This book deals more learning than investment. It was written for the purpose of budding investors, of people seeking their own wake fortune and not an easy path. This book deals with the 5 phases of development established by Parrish, the 5 phases that went through it and that I still go through right now. If you're going down the road of wealth, you might notice from this audiobook that the 5 phases of Parrish are the same 5 phases that the world's wealthiest businessmen and investors went through in order to become very wealthy. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, Warren Buffett, the richest investor in America, and Thomas Edison, the founder of General Electric, all went through these 5 phases, are the same 5 phases that the young new millionaires and billionaires of the internet go through now, while they are still in their 20s or 30s. We live in the information age, and that is why these young people have gone through these phases faster, and maybe it can also you take part in the revolution. The wealth, the great fortunes, and the immensely rich families were born during what is called the Industrial Revolution. The same is happening today in the information age. I find it interesting that we have nowadays multi-millionaires and self-taught billionaires who are 20, 30, or 40 years old. However, there are still people 40 years and older who are tired, the devil by the tail, with an annual income of $50,000. This great disparity is due to the passage from the industrial age to the information age. When we entered the industrial age, people like between Ford and Thomas Edison became billionaires. Today, in the information age, we have Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and Mark Zuckerberg, and the founders of cyber companies who became young millionaires and billionaires. These young people in their 20s will soon have a greater fortune than Bill Gates. Is the power of the passage from one era to another, from the industrial age to the age of the industrial age information. It has been said that there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come, and there is nothing more detrimental, a person who still nourishes old ideas. This audiobook may be for you, a way to review old ideas and possibly find new ones in order to make a fortune. You may read them a paradigm shift in your life, or a transition as radical as the transition from the industrial era to the information age. It may make you define a new financial path. It may allow you to think more like a business owner is an investor than an employee or a worker. Autonomous. It has taken me years to go through it. Fades, and in fact I have not yet crossed all of them. After listening to this book, you may also consider going through these 5 phases, where you may determine that this path does not suit you. If you choose to go this way, the speed at which you will go through these 5 phases of development will depend only on you. Remember that this audiobook does not deal with how to get rich quickly. This choice to undertake such an education and personal development program begins in phase 1, phase of mental preparation. Are you mentally ready to become a rich father? Investor often said, "You money will be all that I want him to be." What he meant is that money comes from our minds. If a person says money is hard to find, it will probably be the case for him. If a person says, "I will never be rich," where it is really hard to become rich, it will probably be true for him. If a person says the only way to become rich is to work hard, then that person will probably work hard. It is a person says, if I had a lot of money, I would put it in the bank because I do not know what to do with it. Then it will probably be so you would be surprised to see how many people think and act like this. And if a person of investing in it is risky, so it is for her as the rich father said, money will be all you want him to be rich, father. But warn that the mental preparation required to become a savvy investor, and is probably similar to the mental preparation of the one who is about to climb Mount Everest or to become a priest. He was joking while making me understand that it should not take such a project lightly. He told me, you start as I do. You start without money, all that you have. These two hope and dream of making a fortune, even though many people feed the same dream. Only a very small number of between them manage to make it happen. Thoughtfully and prepare yourself mentally, because you are about to learn to invest, as very few people can do. You will see the world of investment from within rather than from outside. So when I am ready, if you decide that this is the direction you want to give your life, dear listeners, I hope you like the free. You can listen to the full version following the link in the description. We wish you all the best. Hope that our books always your life for the better.